We saw terrible things. Cremated adults shrunk to the size of small children. Pieces of arms and legs, dead people, whole families burnt to death. I cannot forget these terrible details. I can never forget them. This isn't a memory from some medieval horror. It's from a survivor recalling a single night in February 1945. A night when a city celebrated for its beauty, a city known as Florence on the Elbe, was swallowed by a firestorm created by thousands of Allied bombs. This is the story of how a cultural jewel was burned to the ground, and it leaves us with haunting questions. How did a city of art become a target of total war? And in the final, desperate months of World War II, what is the line between a military objective and pure vengeance? Before the war, if you said the name Dresden, you were talking about breathtaking beauty. For centuries, it was the capital for the kings of Saxony, who poured a fortune into their city, filling it with cultural and artistic treasures. Its skyline was a fairy tale of Baroque domes and elegant spires, all lining the gentle curve of the Elbe River. By any standard, it was one of the most beautiful cities in the world. People called it Elbe Florence, Florence on the Elbe, and it earned that comparison. Art lovers and tourists came from all over the globe to see it. They came to see Raphael's Sistine Madonna in the Semper Gallery, to see the priceless collections in the Zwinger Palace, and to hear music from Wagner and Weber, who had made the city a center of the Romantic movement. At the heart of the city was the Frauenkirche, the Church of Our Lady, with one of Europe's largest stone domes. It was a masterpiece of architecture, a symbol of faith and pride that defined the skyline. The streets below were full of life. Trams rattled through markets, students argued in cafes, and the air was filled with music and a sense of deep history. By 1939, it was Germany's seventh largest city, with over 630,000 people. It was a city of light, art, and music, a jewel box. And crucially, a city that had been almost completely untouched by a war that was now dragging into its sixth year. But that sense of safety was an illusion, and it was about to shatter. By early 1945, the map of Europe was being torn apart. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army was just 70 kilometers from Berlin. Millions of German soldiers and civilians were fleeing west in a desperate retreat. In the west, Allied forces were getting ready to push across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. The Nazi war machine was collapsing, but it wasn't broken yet. German forces were still fighting back on all fronts. It was in this endgame that Allied war planners met. The question was simple: how to use their total air superiority to end the war faster, and, specifically, to help the Soviets advance from the east. The answer was a plan called Operation Thunderclap. The idea was to hit key cities in eastern Germany, Berlin, Leipzig, Chemnitz, and Dresden, with devastating blows. The goal was to paralyze the German state, crush civilian morale, and clog up the transport networks that were being used to reinforce the Eastern Front. In truth, the official justification for bombing Dresden was all about strategy. Memos described it as a major communications center and a vital rail hub. Planners pointed out that the city had 110 factories employing 50,000 workers for the war effort. These factories made everything from cigarette filters to precision optics for bomb sites. At the Yalta Conference, Soviet leaders specifically asked the Western Allies to paralyze these junctions, to stop German troops from moving east to fight the Red Army. For Churchill, Roosevelt, and the commanders, the logic seemed clear. Taking out Dresden's railways was a legitimate military goal, but underneath this cold logic, a more brutal idea had taken root: area bombing. The head of RAF Bomber Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, was a man with a chillingly simple philosophy. He believed the fastest way to win was to destroy not just the factories, but the cities themselves, to make life so unbearable for the German people that their will to fight would just collapse. They sowed the wind, he would later say, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind. And so, Dresden, a city with almost no anti-aircraft defenses, whose people still believed their cultural status made them safe, was marked for destruction. To make matters worse, the city was now dangerously swollen with up to 300,000 refugees fleeing the Red Army. They were crammed into train stations, parks, and the homes of relatives, thinking they had finally found a safe place to hide. They had no idea they were standing at ground zero of a meticulously planned apocalypse. The night of Tuesday, February 13th, 1945, was Shrove Tuesday. Some kids had even celebrated Carnival, despite the war. For 9-year-old Lothar Metzger, it was a day of fun right before his 10th birthday. But at 9:51 p.m., the familiar, terrifying sound of air raid sirens went off. In the Metzger home, like thousands of others, the family went through the motions. Get dressed, grab what you can, and get to the cellar. So Lothar and his family calmly head downstairs and wait for it all to blow over. Then, an announcement crackled over the radio, one Lothar would never forget. Attention! A great air raid will come over our town. Here's what happens next. Around 10:13 p.m., the first planes arrive. These are the pathfinders of the Royal Air Force, and their job is to mark the target. They drop magnesium flares nicknamed Christmas trees, which light up the city center in an eerie, cold green light. Then came the first wave, 244 RAF Lancaster heavy bombers. For 15 minutes, they unleashed a scientifically designed mix of bombs. First, high-explosive blockbusters. Their purpose wasn't just to destroy buildings, but to blow the roofs off, shatter the windows, and expose the wooden frames inside. Then came the incendiaries, tens of thousands of them, designed to set those exposed frames on fire. The city shook. Cellars that were supposed to be safe became death traps as buildings collapsed on top of them. Panic broke out. One survivor, Margaret Fryer, described it. It was beyond belief, worse than the blackest nightmare. So many people were horribly burnt and injured. It became more and more difficult to breathe. But this was only the start. The RAF's plan was diabolical. They knew that after the first attack, rescue workers, firefighters, and civilians would be out in the open, trying to help. The second attack was timed to kill them. At 1:22 a.m., a second, much larger force of 529 Lancasters arrived. They found a city already on fire. The master bomber, flying above, gave a simple order: no markers, bomb visually, bomb visually. For the next 20 minutes, they dumped more than 650,000 incendiary bombs into the inferno. It was this second strike that created a firestorm. The hundreds of individual fires began to merge, superheating the air above them to an incredible temperature, estimated to have reached as high as 1,500 degrees Celsius. This column of superheated air shot upwards, creating a vacuum on the ground. Cold air from the surrounding areas rushed in to fill it, creating winds with the force of a hurricane. People were literally sucked into the flames. The asphalt on the streets melted, trapping anyone trying to run. The fire consumed so much oxygen that people in shelters suffocated where they hid. It was a man-made hurricane of fire, and it still wasn't over. As dawn broke on Ash Wednesday, a new sound filled the sky. This time, it was American bombers. Between 12:17 p.m. and 12:30 p.m., over 300 B-17 flying fortresses attacked. Their official target was the railway yards, but thick smoke covered the city. Using radar, they dropped another 771 tons of bombs, restarting fires and hitting residential areas. A fourth raid by over 200 more American B-17s struck the next day. In just a few days, over 3,900 tons of bombs had been dropped on Dresden. The Florence on the Elbe was gone. In its place was a smoking, silent city of the dead. When the fires finally burned out, the living crawled out into a world they didn't recognize. Dresden was a grey landscape of ash and rubble. The grand city centre, over 600 acres of it, was completely destroyed. Kurt Vonnegut, the American writer who was a prisoner of war in the city, famously described the scene in his novel Slaughterhouse-Five. He and his fellow POWs were being held in an underground meat locker. When we came up, he wrote, the city was gone. The human cost was horrifying. The official death toll, confirmed by a German commission decades later, is estimated to be around 25,000 people. But in the weeks after the raid, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels inflated the numbers to 200,000 or more, trying to stir up anger at home and sympathy abroad. While those numbers were propaganda, the reality on the ground was a nightmare. Survivors wandered through the ruins in shock, looking for loved ones. The air was thick with the smell of death. There were too many bodies to deal with. They lay in the streets and in burned-out cellars. Many were burned so badly they couldn't be identified. Some had shrunk to the size of children from the heat. One of the grimmest jobs fell to men like Kurt Vonnegut. He and other POWs became corpse miners, pulling bodies from the rubble. There were too many to bury. In the city's old market square, the Altmarkt, the authorities made a terrible choice. To stop the spread of disease, they decided to cremate the dead in the open. They brought in iron grates, and for 2 weeks, thousands of bodies were piled onto massive funeral pyres and burned. The city's soul, the Frauenkirche, which had stood for 2 centuries, was now a 15-meter-high pile of rubble. It had actually survived the initial bombing, but the intense heat from the firestorm finally caused its massive stone dome to collapse at 10 a.m. on February 15th. Its ruin symbolized the death of old Dresden more than anything else. The world was shocked by the images coming out of the city. Almost immediately, the debate began. Was this a legitimate military strike or was it a war crime? Even Winston Churchill, who had approved the plan, seemed to have second thoughts. In a memo from late March, he questioned the strategy of bombing German cities simply for the sake of increasing the terror. The destruction of Dresden remains a serious query against the conduct of Allied bombing. But for the people of Dresden, those questions were drowned out by the deafening silence of their dead city. For nearly 50 years, Dresden's wounds stayed open. The city ended up in East Germany under communist rule. The new leaders left the mountain of rubble that was once the Frauenkirche exactly as it was. For almost half a century, it stood as an official memorial against war, a permanent scar on the city. When the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunified in 1990, a new chapter began. A civic movement called the Call from Dresden started pushing to rebuild the church. It was controversial. Some said the ruins should stay as a warning. But the desire to rebuild, to bring back the city's soul, won out. What followed was one of the most amazing reconstruction projects ever. It was funded by donations from all over the world, including from the very countries that had bombed the city. Archaeologists sorted through the rubble stone by stone, salvaging and cataloguing over 8,500 original stones. As the new Frauenkirche rose, it became a powerful symbol. The new light-colored sandstone was mixed with the original dark, fire-charred stones, creating a visible mosaic of destruction and rebirth. In an incredible gesture of reconciliation, the golden cross for the top of the dome was made by a British blacksmith, Alan Smith, whose own father had been an RAF pilot in one of the bomber crews that attacked Dresden. In 2005, 60 years after it was destroyed, the Frauenkirche was reconsecrated. It was no longer just a symbol of loss, but a global symbol of peace and reconciliation. Every year on February 13th, the bells of Dresden's churches ring out. Thousands of people gather and form a human chain around the old city. They remember the victims, but they also send a message against the hate that led to it all. It's a necessary act because the legacy of Dresden is complicated. The bombing has been co-opted by far-right groups who use the tragedy to equate Allied actions with Nazi crimes, a story that started with Goebbels' propaganda machine. This forces us to face the haunting questions that remain. Was it a military necessity that shortened a brutal war? Or was it, as its critics claim, an act of terror against civilians? A war crime hidden in plain sight? Historians still debate this. What is certain is that in total war, lines get blurred. When a whole country is mobilized for conflict, the difference between a soldier and a civilian, between a factory and a home, can start to dissolve. Dresden forces us to ask what price is too high for victory. The German writer Gerhard Hauptmann, when he heard the city was destroyed, said, "Those who have unlearned how to cry will learn it afresh on the destruction of Dresden." In truth, his words remind us that beyond all the strategy and debates lies a profound human tragedy. The story of Dresden isn't just about a city that was lost. It's a warning about what we are capable of losing when the fires of war burn out of control. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations of the difficult questions of our past. And let us know in the comments, what do you think is the most important lesson from the bombing of Dresden? Thank you for watching.